Hey there. In this lecture, I'm going to discuss the next part of the idea for the thinking machine, which is apps. Now, this is exactly as you would imagine it to be. It is our DNA containing an app store. Um, so, the idea is that we have cells in our body, which I'll go into in some detail in a minute. And then we have the central nucleus of the cell, which contains the entire program, which really means, in this theory, an app store of kinds, a genetic app store, where fragments of genetic material do specific functions and respond to and generate certain apps. So, in this theory, the idea is that we're in this biological app store, which typically would be called a DNA fragment or some kind of gene. So think gene equals some kind of an app, which takes messages in and produces them. And we move on then to the idea that these apps have to have some sense of when they're switched on, what their state is, what time it is, and so on. So, so the idea is that these apps have sort of like a runtime system. So this is the analogy is you're on your smartphone, you see an app, you put it onto your phone, and you run it. So there is a part of the cell that runs these genetic fragments, or these apps, as I like to call them, and they take messages in, and they produce messages. They also build various protein type factory structures, such as the cell itself. So these DNA fragments, or these apps, can build cells, and they can then exist inside cells, and then they can do various tasks. So this is the idea. The idea of this is that we're going to try and copy this model for a thinking machine. Uh, so the next area I cover is building and evolving three-dimensional life forms. So this is just a high-level description that there must be apps that are kind of like 3D life form builders, and they have a variety of messages. This is more like pseudocode at this stage, where you can move things, attach things, stretch, rotate, create, and remove, and so on. So basically, if one thinks of these apps having these very primitive functions, which in this case would map to protein type scenarios where things would be built. In a machine, a thinking machine, it would be slightly different. Those ideas then extend to the being, and then you have the central nervous system, and you have the endocrine system, and so on. And at the end, they all still use this idea of messaging and apps, which can operate across multiple cells or within certain cells. So there's then there we have apps that will create new organs. We have assemblers, and we have apps that do enhancements, and so on. So whatever kind of app you can imagine, it can exist in this environment, and these apps exist along the genetic chromosomes in little bundles, and they have evolved over time. And according to this theory, which is not um, very Darwinian in this respect, there are engines, or I'll explain what the engine is. They can convert messages into actual fragments that can be put into the chromosomes, but they can also mutate in the way that is traditionally described in the Darwinian evolutionary model, where it just happens by accident and it's a mistake. If you study, I have done some small research on cell copying, and the cells work really hard not to let that happen, but the idea is that it does happen, and that's how we have evolved according to theory. In this theory, the messages then get re-encoded back onto the chromosome and get to do various jobs which improve the being that they form. So this is just the theory. So you've got a bunch. I talk next about apps that do all sorts of jobs like building kidneys and attaching blood vessels and some kind of builder mechanism there. So that you get the idea that it's just apps building the body. Um, so this leads on to the kind of the more medical uh, side of it, which is the more well known and understood part of medicine, which is the stem cells. And there's a lot of talk about stem cells. There's some controversy about them, but just ignoring that kind of side of it and just saying what is a stem cell. At its simplest, it's just in this theory anyway, it's just a base actor or a base cell that can become any other type of cell, and therefore so it's like it's like a base class in software where you basically don't have you haven't subclassed it. So basically we think of an actor, then the actor cell, which doesn't have any role, and what you do is you give it signals at certain times, and then basically you can turn that cell into another cell type, and there's a sophisticated signaling and timing system which determines what that cell's going to turn into. So for example, specialists will take stem cells and they will grow they'll grow skin, which can be then used for skin grafts. But the basic idea is that there's a messaging system in the cells which tells them to become one kind of cell or another kind of cell, and there's all sorts of nice tables and techniques used by biomedical people who can do that. So if we take that idea, we still have the actor cell, and then we just basically have to have apps which live inside the cell, and some of them know how to build a skin cell. Some of the apps know how to build kidney cells. Some of them know how to build neurons. And then we get into the world of switching apps on or switching apps off. So basically, the idea then we move on into is we have an actor with this big app store, and we're going to say, okay, we're going to turn you into a skin cell, and then the app store kicks in and does its job, but it needs other apps installed in order for that to work. So that's the model we're going to use in the Android. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be building skin cells for an Android, but the idea is that the actor can become these different cell types. So we got the context, which is the type and the base type. Now, a kind of an important other idea we have to take from the cellular biology is to kind of have the concept of the runtime versus the stored program. So I've sort of alluded to this already. So let's just go through this. Basically, at the center of the cell, you have the nucleus that's got all the apps in there, or the genes. Some of them are switched on and off. And then you've messaging that goes into the nucleus, and you've messaging that goes in and out of the runtime system. So the blue part in the diagram would be the runtime system, and there would be all these little bioprograms, and there'd be all these little kind of for want of a better description, all these little protein builders or whatever. And in here, out of here would be these builders that take fragments of the code, they execute them, as in to run them. So this is the area where the programs run. This is where the total program is, and then some of them are switched on and off. So this is the model we're going to adopt in the Android. So we talk about DNA, we talk about bytecode, and Java. You get this idea of bytecode, which is just this series of codes that, when it's passed through the Java engine, these bytecodes just run, and they basically execute the program. In the case of the cells, it's this DNA on these strands that runs through these machine readers, and basically executes the program. So what executes the program? What executes the program is the RNA. So according to this theory, this is the way it works. So the RNA executes. It's the machine reader. So it runs through the through uh, uh, the system, and it executes it. So we have the machine, we have the programs, we have them switched on and off, and so on. And then we have, then you've got these nasty viruses that will, which are RNA based, and they basically go into they go, instead of coming from the central part of the cell, they go in through the outer layers. They kind of fake their way in, and they run programs, and they basically destroy. They mess with the messaging aspect of the cell. Um, so for example, with T cells, if you get attacked by an RNA virus in T cell, and it messes with your messaging in your cell, then suddenly you find you may not have an immune system. Uh, so basically, programs can break into cells and then attack them. So if we design an Android with this model, we have to make sure that that those kinds of engines can't get into the actor cells in order to run errant code, sort of to be hacked into. I talk here about orchestrator apps and conductor messaging and growing. So I kind of come up with this idea of an orchestrator app. So when a human being is growing, there's a symphony of cell types, which is the music analogy, and then so there's different apps which get switched on, and they build the body and so on. In a traditional world, an Android is built on a production machine, on a factory lot or whatever. But you could imagine a futuristic Android maybe having some kind of builder builder cell types. Maybe these are tiny machines that will build the bigger machine. So these are like orchestrator cells, conductor messaging, and so on. You get the idea that the conductor conducts the orchestra. So that's all I'm really chatting about here. And then I talk here a little bit about regrowing limbs and generation and regeneration, and we talk about how, for example, I think it's a frog can regrow its limb at a certain point in its time, at a certain point in its life, and the idea is that there's messaging at its very simplest. You just imagine an organism that can take messaging that says regrow messaging, whereas human beings, it appears, don't have that. So if we wanted to try and make human beings mirror that, we'd need sort of to send those regrow messages. Of course, the danger is if you have the ability to do this, these regrow messages, then you run the risk that maybe you'll be born with maybe more than extra limbs. So there's a lot of safety mechanisms in our DNA to shut down that kind of messaging when we hit a certain growth phase. But I guess what I'm trying to say in this entry is it's all to do with messaging to tell the cells to do certain apps like regrow and so on. And if one thinks in terms of apps that do growing of limbs and messages that are activating them in certain cases, then that's what you need to do to regrow them. You just find the correct genes or apps which will do it. I'm not saying it's simple. I'm just saying that's the idea. Then we've got message optimizers, and this is I'm just kind of exploring the idea of these different more complicated apps from simple ones, and kind of like in software terms, like subroutines that can call other subroutines, apps that can call other apps, and so on, and how that could be achieved here. This is just initial investigation into the idea. I talk about onion modeling, the onion model for the message filtering, and so we just have a message bus of message types that go into the system consciousness. I'll talk later about the system consciousness, or shortly. I talk here about antigens and remembering attacks. This is a kind of an interesting case because the body remembers an attack. I mean, a human being, if they're attacked, will remember it, but a body will produce antigens. So, so the idea that a body can defend itself against a viral attack, which is essentially a program, a kind of a viral program that attacks the cells. This goes back to the idea that a virus attacks a body and produces a response, but the messaging, the attack messaging, it can formulate a description of the attack and can then re-encode that into reprogram the body's defense systems. So then here we enter the idea of the body not just being sort of Darwinian, I think, where the body is intelligently defending itself and remembering what the attack was, and in some cases passing that genetic memory onto the child through blood and through DNA. So there's some debate over whether it's DNA, but the point is that the body is a dynamic system with a dynamic messaging system that remembers these things, and it can re-encode the attacks, the viral attacks, in such a way that they can rebuild other antigens, which will then attack the viruses because it recognizes them. So to do that, it has to analyze the attack. It has to form a messaging system that will talk to the apps, in with this case our genes, which will then reconstruct these new antigens, which will then enter the bloodstream and protect the body from a subsequent attack. So if you even just take an immune system attack or an attack on a body, you can see that the body does have the ability to react intelligently. Now I know people would say that's an evolved response, but what I'm trying to argue is that the body can message itself to defend itself, is really what I'm trying to say here. Okay. Then you've bone marrow and stem cells, and that's where a lot of the memories are stored in these areas of the body. And there's also stem cells, which can then are untyped actors, which can then be activated into different typed actors. Like a typed actor, I just mean like it turns into a kidney cell, or it turns into a neuron, or whatever. And then we move on to kind of an interesting topic, which is induced pluripotent cells, and this is just a fancy term for taking an untyped stem cell and typing it to some other kind of type that's useful, like skin or an eye or an organ or whatever it is. Basically turn this cell into what it should be, and the way we do this again is we use messaging. We hit it with the right kind of messaging and so on. So Android should really use this model. So I'm thinking maybe you'd have a pool of these untyped actors in the Android, and they can get turned into these other kinds of types in the cortical stem of the Android, and it could then do different functions, just like the way a human does it, but it's a software-based solution as opposed to a physical solution. Then we have a message bus for the brain, and this is where we start entering kind of the more fun part of the theory, which is the brain. So this is not an easy topic, and I'm gonna probably make mistakes. So don't chuckle too much, but if I do, but the point is I'm going to go over the bits I found and how I got them to work out. So we have message circuits in the brain, and I call them bus channels, and they deal with different operations. So if we take the approach that the brain is a series of full of all these messages of different types, and they're getting moved around the brain, there must be places where they aggregate and go on these sort of almost like highways in the brain, and they must end up going into a central location, and then they get accumulated and they get processed. All right, so these are we have well-known names for these message types, which talk to the different apps in the brain, or different parts of the brain which do different tasks. There's dopamine, there's serotonin, there's norepinephrine. I got that wrong, didn't I? Norepinephrine. I said it wrong, and I'm not even going to try and say it again. And there's epinephrine. I got it wrong, so I can't even say it. I mean, that's a bit pathetic, but you get the idea. It's here. Norepinephrine. Yeah. So anyway, here's the idea. Okay, so here's your brain. Here's the brain. Okay, so we have Um, so what I'm trying to say is, if you see a diagram like this according to this theory, um, there's message circuits. So the first point is that there's pathways, which I call circuits. Well, and it's well accepted there's circuits in the brain which loop around and come back, and messages go out to areas and they circle around and then they come back. So you can see here there's there's circuits for the serotonin and the circuits for the dopamine, and they have different effects on us as people, and they're well documented. And I'll talk about this in more detail later. But the point, I guess, the point I'm trying to make here is there's circuits in the brain, and they carry messages, and certain messages, the hormones, and so on, and they talk to the cell types or neurons or whatever in the brain, and they produce different effects in us. And we say, "Oh, I feel good. Oh, I took, that tablet. I feel good now." And so the idea is that it produces messages that go to certain parts of the brain, and then the circuits go back to other parts, and then we have that sense of the effect of the chemical, which is a message type. Yeah. So typically in a protein-based being, which is what we are, the message types are protein-based in the way that they work. The neurons use electrical message types. But a lot of these types are kind of protein based, and you can take tablets and all that good stuff. Okay, and then so the idea is that these messages end up back in that what I call the SC, which is the system consciousness, and I'll talk some more about that. I have a location in the brain where I say that is. And then we have all these other things coming in, like audio, vision, hearing, and so on. And then we have things like reward, pleasure, motor function, compulsion, and others. For example, for dopamine. And then, for example, if we exercise, we feel good, and that's because we're getting certain messaging. So I talk some more about that there, and that's fine. And then, so that's it really. So I guess the point of this chapter mostly is just to set up the idea of the apps, talking to the cell types, which are actors, untyped actors, which become typed actors using messaging. These different apps build different. They have various levels of sophistication. They've evolved over time, and then according to this theory, there's a reverse messaging mechanism. I say, take a look at, for example, the way we catch a cold, or we get a cold, and our body learns how to protect ourselves against it. So there's a learning mechanism where things are re-encoded and can reproduce things, and I say that they can get re-encoded into our genes. That's a controversial idea, I know, but that's the theory. There are also random mutations over time due to natural selection, all that good stuff. And then the idea is the brain then has this messaging service. The endocrine carries a slow messaging. It's like a broadcast system, and then the brain has neurons which have the electrical signals, and then we have these kind of different circuits where we're feeding the messages back to the central SC location, which I'll talk about later. But the basic idea is circuits feed it back, and then these circuits have different effects based on chemical properties, and they make us feel different depending on the area. We feel differently about the world or whatever, mood, memory processing, reward, pleasure, euphoria, and so on. So that's it. That's the idea. So that's the next part of the theory. As the theory progresses, I'll get deeper into the brain structures and how they work, and how we can use that circuitry idea and all these ideas in intelligent being, thinking machine.